My grandfather broke ground on this land in 1952. My father expanded it in the 70s. Now it belonged to me, 80 acres of rolling pasture, modest barns, and the small two-bedroom ranch house where I had grown up learning how to mend fences and birth calves. The deed sat framed on my office wall, a reminder that this piece of earth had Thornton blood mixed into its soil for 3 generations. For most of my life, our land had bordered nothing but other farms and open country. The nearest neighbor was once a half-mile away. But cities grow like hungry beasts, and 5 years ago, developers bought Old Man Wilson's 300 acres to the east. They carved it into identical plots with identical houses, branded it Meadowbrook Estates, and sold each parcel for 5 times what the land was actually worth. I remember the day the bulldozers arrived. I stood at my eastern fence line watching them tear into the earth, knowing that my peaceful existence was about to change. The construction lasted 14 months. The dust would settle on my truck each morning. The noise would spook my horses, but I said nothing. Live and let live has always been my policy. When the last house was built and the streets were named after trees that had been cut down to make room for them, the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association formed. I received their welcome packet in my mailbox, complete with a 40-page rulebook and an invitation to their monthly meetings. I tossed it in my burn pile. My land predated their development by 70 years. I was not part of their jurisdiction, and I had no interest in their regulations about lawn height and approved mailbox designs. My routine remained unchanged. Every morning I rose before the sun, fed the animals, checked fences, and tended to whatever repair was most pressing. By midday, I would break for lunch. Afternoons were for bookkeeping, supply runs, or working with the small herd of cattle I maintained. Nothing fancy, just honest work that kept the lights on and honored the legacy my father left behind. The first 6 months after Meadowbrook filled with residents were surprisingly peaceful. Most neighbors waved when they drove past. Some even stopped to admire the horses. A few families brought their children to see real farm animals up close. I would hand the kids carrots to feed the horses and watch their eyes light up. It seemed like coexistence might be possible after all. Then Karen Hunter moved into the largest house on the eastern border, a 2-story monstrosity with gleaming white columns that looked ridiculously out of place in rural Oklahoma. She drove a white Range Rover with a personalized license plate that read, "Blessed." From our first encounter, I knew she would be trouble. She did not introduce herself or bring over cookies like some other new neighbors had. Instead, I found her standing at my fence line one afternoon, taking pictures of my barn with her phone. When I approached and introduced myself, she barely looked at me. "Your property is affecting my view," she said, not bothering with a greeting. "I paid for pastoral scenery, not industrial farm equipment." Industrial farm equipment. She was referring to my 20-year-old tractor and a stack of hay bales. "This is a working ranch, ma'am," I explained calmly. "It was here long before your house was built." "Well, things change," she replied, her voice sharp as barbed wire. "The HOA has standards for the entire community." "I am not part of your HOA," I said. "My property is outside your jurisdiction." She looked at me as if I had spoken a foreign language. "Everyone in this area is part of Meadowbrook. It is for the good of all property values." "Not my property," I said. "Check your boundary maps. My land is independently owned and operated." 2 days later, I received my first official letter from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA, citing violations of community standards and aesthetic guidelines. The letter requested that I move my equipment storage out of sight from neighboring properties and reduce livestock presence in visible areas. I wrote back a single paragraph, politely explaining that as a non-member of their association, their rules did not apply to my property. I included copies of my deed and property line documentation. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The letters kept coming, each one more strongly worded than the last. The third letter was signed personally by Karen Hunter, HOA Enforcement Committee Chair. It threatened potential legal action for willful noncompliance with community standards. I decided to ignore them. I had work to do, animals to care for, and no time for paper wars. but Karen had apparently made me her personal project. One Tuesday morning, I spotted her silver blonde hair bobbing along my fence line. She was wearing designer boots that had clearly never seen mud and carrying what looked like a measuring tape. I watched from my barn as she stretched the tape from my fence post to a marker she had placed in the ground. I walked over slowly, making sure she saw me approaching. "Can I help you with something?" She jumped, clearly startled, but quickly recovered her composure. "I am verifying property boundaries," she said, chin raised. "The HOA has reason to believe your fence encroaches on community land." "You are trespassing," I said flatly. "This is private property. If you have boundary concerns, you can contact the county assessor's office." "Do not threaten me," she snapped. "I am acting in an official capacity." "Your HOA has no official capacity on my land," I replied. "Please leave now, or I will have to call the sheriff." She left, but the look she gave me could have curdled milk. That afternoon, I called the county office to verify my property lines. They confirmed what I already knew. My fences were well within my boundaries, some of them set back several feet from the actual property line. 3 days later, 4 men in Meadowbrook Estates security shirts showed up at my gate. They informed me they were inspecting for code violations. I did not open the gate. I simply stood there, arms crossed, until they eventually retreated to their vehicle. The next day, a county code enforcement officer appeared. He was apologetic and explained that they had received multiple complaints about unsanitary conditions and improper animal handling. He conducted a quick inspection, found nothing amiss, and left after apologizing for the inconvenience. "Not your fault," I told him. "Some people move to the country but do not actually want to live near country things." He chuckled knowingly. "Got those types all over the county now." The following week, I discovered my mailbox smashed, bent nearly in half as if hit by a baseball bat. The mail inside was soaked from the previous night's rain. No proof of who did it, but the timing was suspicious. I filed a report with the sheriff's department, but they said without evidence, there was little they could do. I installed a new, stronger mailbox and went about my business. But the harassment continued. Meadowbrook residents began to slow down when passing my property, pointing and taking photos. Some would honk repeatedly, startling my horses. I found trash, fast food wrappers and empty soda bottles tossed over my fence line. Karen's campaign expanded. My neighbors on the north side, the Johnsons, stopped by one evening to warn me that she had been going door to door in Meadowbrook, circulating a petition to have my property declared a community nuisance. "She is telling everyone your animals are disease-ridden and that you are lowering property values," Margaret Johnson explained. "Most folks know better, but she is convincing the new residents who do not know you." I thanked them for the warning but assured them I was not worried. My property was legal, my animals were healthy, and no HOA had jurisdiction over my ranch. Still, I began documenting everything, taking photos of my property daily, saving the HOA letters, keeping a log of every suspicious incident. Then came the morning that pushed me over the edge. I was feeding the horses when a county animal control vehicle pulled into my driveway, followed by 2 police cruisers. An officer and the animal control worker approached me, both looking uncomfortable. "Sir, we have received a report of animal neglect and possible illegal disposal of deceased livestock," the officer said. "We need to inspect your property." My blood ran cold, then hot with anger. "Who made this report?" The officer glanced at his notepad. "A Ms. Hunter. She provided photographs allegedly showing malnourished animals and what she claims is improper disposal of animal remains." The animal remains turned out to be a pile of old leather tack I had been repairing behind the barn. The malnourished animals were my perfectly healthy horses and cattle, as confirmed by the animal control officer who apologized profusely after the inspection. As they were leaving, I spotted Karen's white Range Rover slowly driving past my front gate. She did not stop or look my way, but I could feel her watching, waiting for them to lead me away in handcuffs. That was when I realized she was not going to stop. This was not about noise or aesthetics or property values. This was about power and control, and she would not rest until she had driven me off my land. I had tried peace, I had tried patience, now it was time for something else. That same afternoon, I drove to the nearest electronics store and purchased 8 motion-activated security cameras with night vision capability. They cost nearly $2,000, money I had been saving for a new corral gate. But I knew this investment was necessary. I spent the rest of the day installing them strategically around my property, focusing on the boundaries nearest to Meadowbrook estates and areas where trespassing seemed most likely. I did not stop there. I added solar-powered motion lights at key points along my fence line. If anyone crossed onto my property after dark, they would be instantly illuminated. I set up the camera system to send alerts to my phone whenever motion was detected in certain zones. It did not take long to get results. The very next evening, my phone buzzed with an alert. I checked the footage to see Karen herself standing at my eastern fence tossing something over onto my property. I zoomed in on the recording. She was throwing what looked like kitchen scraps, rotting food waste, into my pasture where my cattle grazed. I saved the video and continued monitoring. Over the next week, the cameras caught 4 more incidents. Twice, it was Karen throwing trash over the fence. Once, it was 2 men I recognized from the HOA security team examining my fence posts with flashlights. Most disturbing was the footage of Karen approaching my horse pasture at dusk, rattling the fence aggressively to spook my animals, then taking photos as they ran. I created a digital folder with date-stamped footage of each incident. I added notes, weather conditions, and exact times. When I had accumulated enough evidence, I returned to the sheriff's department. This time, I brought my laptop and external hard drive loaded with video proof. Deputy Martinez reviewed the footage carefully, his expression growing increasingly grave. "This is clear harassment," he said finally, "and the livestock tampering could be a criminal offense." He took official statements and copied all my evidence. The next day, he personally visited Karen to issue a stern warning about trespassing and animal harassment. I was not present for their conversation, but according to Deputy Martinez, she denied all allegations until he showed her the footage on his tablet. Even then, she claimed she was removing dangerous items from my fence line for community safety. The deputy's warning did little to deter her. If anything, it escalated her behavior. 3 days later, as my wife Lisa was returning from grocery shopping, Karen intercepted her in our driveway. The security camera captured the entire incident. Karen stormed up to Lisa's car window, pointing her finger and shouting loud enough that our camera picked up every word. "You and your husband are destroying this community. We will not stop until this disgusting farm is shut down. Do you have any idea who I am? I am friends with the mayor. I am friends with judges." Lisa, normally the calmest person I know, was shaken when I found her sitting in the car, still parked in our driveway. "She would not let me get out," Lisa explained, her voice trembling. "She kept screaming about property values and threatened to sue us personally." That crossed the final line. No one threatens my family. No one harasses my wife on our own property. I called Deputy Martinez immediately and began the process of filing for a restraining order. The footage of Karen screaming at Lisa provided exactly the evidence we needed. Word of Karen's meltdown spread through Meadowbrook estates. Several residents reached out privately to express their support for us. It seemed many of them had also experienced Karen's tyrannical approach to HOA leadership, but had been too intimidated to speak up. James Wilson, another HOA board member, called me personally. "I want you to know that most of us do not support what Karen is doing," he said. "She has been acting unilaterally, without board approval for most of these actions against your property." "Then why has no one stopped her?" I asked. There was a pause. "She has a way of making people uncomfortable about opposing her," he admitted. "But things are changing now. People are seeing her true colors." It became clear that Karen had been ruling the HOA through intimidation rather than proper procedure. My stand against her was causing ripples throughout the community. The very next HOA meeting, which I learned about through my new allies in Meadowbrook, turned contentious when several members questioned Karen's personal vendetta against my ranch. Karen, however, refused to back down. If anything, being challenged only made her more determined. She began driving past my property multiple times daily. My cameras caught her taking hundreds of photos, presumably searching for new violations to report. When official channels failed her, she turned to social media, creating a neighborhood watch page that thinly disguised her targeting of my property. But now I had what I needed: documented evidence of harassment, trespassing, animal endangerment, and threatening behavior. The power balance was shifting, one recorded incident at a time. I am not a man who seeks out conflict. I prefer the simplicity of hard work and honest dealing. But there comes a point when turning the other cheek becomes self-destructive. With a folder full of evidence and a wife still shaken by Karen's confrontation, I knew it was time to fight fire with fire. Or in this case, harassment with legal action. Through a referral from Deputy Martinez, I contacted Elijah Washington, an attorney specializing in rural property disputes and harassment cases. His office was a modest building in town, nothing flashy, which suited me fine. Elijah himself was a tall, lean man with gray streaking his temples and calloused hands that told me he understood manual labor. "Been handling these developer versus farmer cases for 20 years now," he said after reviewing my evidence. "Used to be rare, now it is half my practice." He leaned back in his chair. "The good news is that your documentation is excellent. The bad news is that people like Ms. Hunter rarely back down without a significant push." Together, we drafted a comprehensive cease and desist letter addressed to both Karen personally and the HOA board. The letter detailed every documented incident of harassment, trespassing, defamation, and animal endangerment. It included still images from my security footage as evidence. The language was firm, professional, and unmistakably serious about potential legal consequences. Elijah also conducted a thorough review of my property documents and the Meadowbrook Estates HOA charter. "As I suspected," he confirmed, "their jurisdiction ends precisely at your property line. Their own founding documents acknowledge the exclusion of your parcel from their authority." We filed the restraining order request, backed by the video of Karen confronting Lisa in our driveway. The temporary order was granted within days, legally prohibiting Karen from coming within 100 feet of our property, our vehicles, or our persons. The HOA board received copies of all documentation, including the restraining order. Within hours of delivery, James Wilson called again. "There is an emergency board meeting tonight," he told me. "Several members are demanding Karen step down as enforcement chair." But Karen, true to form, had a countermove ready. The very next morning, county officials arrived with a formal nuisance complaint filed against my property. The complaint alleged improper waste management, excessive noise, airborne contaminants, and negative impact on adjacent property values, all requiring investigation and potential abatement. The official inspecting my property was clearly uncomfortable. "Between you and me," he said quietly as we walked the perimeter, "these complaints are mostly subjective and unlikely to result in any citations, but we have to investigate when filed through official channels." Elijah was unsurprised when I called him. "Classic intimidation tactic," he said. "She is trying to drown you in bureaucracy and inspections." He paused, then added, "But she has overplayed her hand. Filing a false official complaint can be grounds for a defamation lawsuit." We drafted a counter-notice informing both Karen and the HOA board of our intent to pursue civil litigation for defamation, harassment, and malicious use of administrative processes if the campaign against my property continued. The letter included an itemized list of potential damages we would seek, including emotional distress, business interference, and punitive damages. The HOA board, now clearly alarmed by the legal escalation, attempted to arrange mediation. The president, a retired banker named Robert Green, called me personally. "We want to resolve this situation amicably," he insisted. "The board never authorized these actions against your property." "I appreciate that, Mr. Green," I replied. "But this has gone beyond neighbor disagreements. My family has been threatened. False reports have been filed with law enforcement. My animals have been endangered. There is no middle ground here. The mediation session was scheduled anyway. Karen arrived flanked by her own attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who immediately began talking about community standards and reasonable accommodations. Elijah listened politely, then laid our evidence folder on the table with a gentle thud. "Before we discuss accommodations," he said calmly, "I would like everyone to review Exhibit A, footage of Ms. Hunter throwing waste into my client's livestock pasture, an action that could be prosecuted as a criminal offense." The room fell silent. Karen's attorney flipped through the evidence, his expression growing increasingly concerned. When he reached the video of Karen confronting Lisa, he closed the folder and whispered something to Karen. Her face flushed red. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, standing abruptly. "I am being persecuted for trying to maintain community standards. That farm is destroying everything we have built." "Ms. Hunter," Elijah replied evenly, "your client's actions have crossed from HOA enforcement into criminal territory. We are prepared to pursue this matter to its full legal conclusion if necessary." The mediation ended with no resolution. Karen refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing and rejected all proposed compromises. As we left, Elijah seemed strangely satisfied. "Sometimes you need to play out the full hand to see someone's true intentions," he said. "Now everyone knows she is not interested in resolution, only in winning at all costs." He was right. The failed mediation shifted the dynamics within the HOA. Board members who had been reluctant to challenge Karen now saw the legal liability she represented. The community that had been silently watching now had to choose sides. I have always believed that given enough rope, difficult people will eventually hang themselves. Karen proved this theory correct in spectacular fashion. About a week after the failed mediation, I arranged for Sarah Jenkins from the County Animal Welfare Association to visit my ranch. Sarah had been conducting routine welfare checks on farm animals for years, and I had invited her to document the health of my livestock in case Karen's animal abuse allegations resurfaced. It was a clear Tuesday morning. Sarah parked her truck with the association logo clearly visible and began her inspection. We were in the cattle pasture, Sarah taking notes on her clipboard, when Karen's white Range Rover screeched to a halt on the road alongside my property. Despite the restraining order, Karen stormed to the fence line, smartphone raised like a weapon. "I see what you are doing," she shouted, her voice carrying across the pasture. "Staging a fake inspection, I have already called the real authorities." Sarah turned, clearly confused. "Ma'am, I am conducting an official welfare check at the owner's request." Karen's face contorted with rage. "You are covering up abuse. I have documented everything. This man is violating codes and endangering the community." What Karen failed to notice was Melissa Brady, another Meadowbrook resident who had stopped her car to witness the commotion. Melissa, phone in hand, began recording the entire encounter. Sarah attempted to explain her official role, showing Karen her county identification, but Karen grew more enraged. "Do you know who I am? I have the county commissioner on speed dial. I will have your job by sunset." Her tirade continued for nearly 5 minutes, growing increasingly incoherent and threatening. Sarah remained professional but eventually returned to her inspection, ignoring Karen's shouts. Finally, Karen stormed back to her vehicle, nearly hitting a mailbox as she sped away. What happened next was entirely beyond my control. Melissa, who had captured the entire meltdown, uploaded the video to her social media accounts. She added a brief explanation. "HOA Karen loses it on animal welfare worker checking healthy animals, restraining order already in place." By nightfall, the video had thousands of views. By morning, it had been shared by several local news outlets. By the following afternoon, it had been picked up by national social media accounts specializing in entitled people content. The headlines were merciless. "HOA Karen's ranch rampage and restraining order, no problem for Queen Karen." And watch, "HOA tyrant threatens county worker over healthy animals." Local news vans appeared outside Meadowbrook Estates. Reporters requested statements from the HOA board. The story attracted attention because it hit a nerve with people across the country. The overreach of HOAs, the entitlement of certain community leaders, the rural versus suburban culture clash. Karen attempted to control the narrative by creating social media posts claiming she was the victim of harassment. She posted carefully selected photos of my property, zoomed in on normal farm equipment to make it look industrial and imposing. But her efforts backfired when followers compared her images to the unedited drone footage a local news station had captured showing my well-maintained ranch. The HOA board called an emergency session that was unprecedented, open to all Meadowbrook residents. The meeting had to be moved to the community clubhouse to accommodate the crowd. I did not attend. The matter was internal to their organization, but James Wilson called me afterward. It was the most heated meeting in Meadowbrook history, he reported. Residents were furious about the negative attention Karen brought to our community. When the board showed the legal bills already accumulated from her campaign against your property, people nearly rioted. The vote was almost unanimous. Karen was removed from the enforcement committee and asked to resign from the board entirely. When she refused, a second vote removed her from the board by an overwhelming margin. She did not take it well, James added. Knocked over a chair on her way out and threatened to sue everyone, but it is done. The nightmare is over. But the internet is forever. Karen's meltdown had become part of the permanent digital record. Local businesses recognized her from the video. Parents at her daughter's school whispered when she appeared for pickup. The community that had once feared her now openly avoided her. The tide had turned completely, washing away her power in a flood of public opinion. And it had happened not because of my legal maneuvers, but because her own actions had finally been exposed to the light of day. The first morning I woke up without a new HOA letter in my mailbox felt strange. The first week without spotting Karen's Range Rover driving slowly past my property felt even stranger. After months of constant vigilance and legal battles, peace returned so suddenly that it left an odd emptiness in its wake. But emptiness makes room for rebuilding. I replaced my damaged mailbox with a sturdy new one, mounted on a proper treated post set in concrete, something that would take more than a baseball bat to destroy. I repainted my fences, not because any HOA demanded it, but because it was time. I spent a full weekend repairing the garden that Lisa had neglected during the heights of the conflict. My animals seemed to sense the change. The horses ventured closer to the eastern pasture again, no longer spooked by frequent disturbances. The cattle grazed peacefully along the fence line they had previously avoided. Life developed a rhythm again, the natural cadence of rural existence that had been disrupted for so long. Meadowbrook Estates itself was undergoing transformation. Under James Wilson's interim leadership, the HOA adopted a more collaborative approach to community management. The first official act of the restructured board was to send me a formal letter of apology, acknowledging that my property was indeed outside their jurisdiction and expressing regret for the harassment campaign. Robert Green, the HOA president, delivered the letter personally. "We got caught up in one person's agenda," he admitted as we stood in my driveway. "Many of us moved here because we love the countryside. We never intended to drive out the very things that make this area special." Word spread through the county about what had happened. The local newspaper ran a feature article about the changing dynamics between agricultural heritage and new development. I was interviewed about my perspective on maintaining rural traditions while accommodating growth. This led to an invitation to speak at a county planning commission meeting about landowner rights and the importance of buffer zones between developments and existing farms. I am not a public speaker by nature, but I found myself standing before a packed room, explaining the realities of agricultural life to urban planners and developers. "A farm is not just pretty scenery to look at from your back deck," I told them. "It is work. It has sounds and smells. It exists in all seasons and weather. Real country living means accepting these things, not trying to sanitize them out of existence." The commission responded by proposing new guidelines for developments adjacent to agricultural properties, requirements for disclosure to new buyers, setback minimums, and buffer zone recommendations. It would not solve every conflict, but it was a start. Back at Meadowbrook, residents began to approach my property differently. Rather than complaints, I received questions. How did cattle rotation work? Why did certain farm activities happen at specific times of year? Some even asked if their children could visit to learn about farm animals. I organized a small open house one Saturday, inviting neighbors to tour the ranch and understand what we actually did there. Nearly 30 families attended, including several HOA board members. Children petted horses and collected fresh eggs. Adults asked thoughtful questions about sustainable farming practices. "This is what we should have done from the beginning," James Wilson commented as the event wound down. "Understanding before judgment." Meanwhile, Karen's "For Sale" sign appeared in her front yard barely a month after her removal from the board. But selling proved difficult. Every potential buyer who searched the address online found news articles and viral videos connected to the property. Twice, the sign disappeared only to reappear weeks later with a slightly lower asking price. I took no pleasure in her difficulties. Vengeance had never been my goal, only peace and the right to continue my way of life. In a sense, Karen had been caught in her own trap, ensnared by consequences she had never imagined when she first decided to target my ranch. As summer turned to fall, I installed a new sign at the entrance to my property. Hand-carved from oak, it read "Thornton Ranch, Est 1952, with a simple image of a horse and cow beneath the text. It was not meant as a statement or challenge, simply an acknowledgement of history and continuity. Several Meadowbrook residents stopped to compliment the sign. One elderly gentleman even brought me an old photograph showing my grandfather's original entrance from the 1950s. "Thought you might like to have this," he said. "I grew up around here. Your family has always been good stewards of this land." That photograph now hangs beside my father's deed in my office, reminders that what we protect is not just property, but heritage. The legal documents and security camera footage were filed away in a cabinet, hopefully never to be needed again. Seasons have a way of changing people. Winter came and went. Spring brought new calves and fresh growth. Almost a year passed since the HOA war had reached its viral conclusion. I had nearly forgotten about Karen entirely when an unexpected knock came at my door one cool autumn evening. I opened it to find her standing on my porch. She looked different, her immaculate appearance somewhat faded, her trademark confidence diminished. The designer clothes had been replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. The luxury SUV was gone from my driveway, replaced by a modest sedan. "Mr. Thornton," she said, her voice lacking its former sharpness, "I hope I am not intruding." I said nothing, waiting for her purpose to become clear. "I have sold my house," she continued. "I am moving to Arizona next week. Before I left, I felt I should." She paused, searching for words that clearly did not come easily to her. "I behaved badly. The things I did were wrong. I got caught up in what I thought a perfect community should be and lost sight of basic decency." It was not exactly an apology, more of an acknowledgement, but it was more than I had ever expected from her. "I wish you well in Arizona," I said simply, tipping my hat slightly. She looked as if she wanted to say more, perhaps expected more in return. Forgiveness, perhaps, or a lengthy conversation processing the conflict. But some bridges, once burned, leave only ashes. I closed the door gently and returned to my evening routine. From my window, I watched her stand on the porch for a moment longer before walking slowly back to her car. As she drove away, I felt no anger, no satisfaction, no vindication, only a quiet certainty that some lessons must be learned the hard way. Later that evening, I walked my property line in the fading light, something I had done with my father and he had done with his father before him. The fence stood strong, not as a barrier but as a boundary. Beyond it, lights came on in Meadowbrook homes as families settled in for the night. Boundaries are not about keeping people out. They are about defining what must be protected. In the end, that was what Karen had never understood. My stand was never against progress or community or even against her personally. It was for something more fundamental, the right to continue a way of life that had meaning and purpose. As darkness fell completely, I headed back toward the house where Lisa had dinner waiting. Behind me, the silhouettes of barns and silos stood against the starlit sky, simple structures that had witnessed generations of struggle and perseverance. Tomorrow would bring new work, new challenges, perhaps even new conflicts. But the land would remain, and with it, the quiet knowledge that some things are worth fighting for.